All right, let's crack open a prehistoric cold case, one that messes with everything we thought we knew about the most famous predator to ever walk the earth. We're talking about a case of mistaken identity that is completely rewriting the final days of the dinosaurs.
You know, our whole story here kicks off with a fossil discovery so amazing, it has basically overturned decades of scientific thinking. And this isn't just about one pile of bones. It's about a massive misunderstanding of the tyrant king's entire family tree.
So picture this. The scene of the crime, if you will, is a fossil dug up in Montana way back in 2006. It is a jaw-dropping snapshot from 67 million years ago, showing two dinosaurs perfectly preserved, looking like they were locked in their final deadly battle.
Okay, so one of the fighters was a no-brainer. The victim, a Triceratops, was super easy to identify. But its attacker? Well, that's where the mystery begins. It was a tyrannosaur for sure, but it was smaller, leaner, and it kicked off a debate that would rage on for years.
And this one question, it just split the entire field of paleontology right down the middle. Was this thing just a lanky, awkward teenage T-Rex still growing into its huge adult body? Or was it something else, a totally different species living in the T-Rex's shadow? For the longest time, the leading theory was pretty simple. This fossil, and a few others like it, were just juvenile Tyrannosaurus Rex. I mean, this idea was so widely accepted, it basically became the go-to explanation for any medium-sized tyrannosaur from that time. And this wasn't just some wild guess. This was the foundation, the very bedrock of how we thought a T-Rex grew up. These smaller fossils were seen as the absolute key to figuring out the entire T-Rex life cycle, from a tiny hatchling to that giant apex predator. And you can see why this idea was so popular. It was just neat. It solved this huge ecological puzzle. See, paleontologists had noticed this weird gap in the fossil record, a real lack of medium-sized predators. So the idea that teenage T-Rexes just filled that role, pushing out any rivals, it made perfect sense, a tidy explanation. But then things started to change. The Dueling Dinosaurs fossil ended up at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And for the very first time, it was put under the microscope of a serious modern scientific investigation. And that official story started to fall apart. The key to cracking this whole case came down to a really cool technique called histology. Think of it like this. Scientists can slice into the bone, look at it under a microscope, and just like the rings on a tree, they can count the growth rings. This lets them get past guesswork and figure out the animal's true biological age. And what they found? Whoa, it was a total bombshell. The growth rings showed this predator was about 20 years old when it died. Its growth had slowed way, way down. This was no fast-growing teenager. This was a fully mature adult. And it didn't stop there. The more they looked, the more the evidence just piled up against the teen T-Rex idea. A young T-Rex should have bones that are still growing, right? But this animal's spine was fused, a classic sign of adulthood. Its arms were way longer proportionally. It had more teeth built for slicing instead of bone crushing, and its whole body was lighter and more agile. It just didn't fit. I mean, it got to the point where one of the scientists on the study, Dr. James Napoli, basically said, look, for this to be a young T-Rex, it would have to break all the rules of how animals grow. The evidence was crystal clear. The teenage T-Rex theory was dead. So, with the prime suspect officially off the hook, the investigation could finally point to the real culprit. And it was a name that had been floating around for, get this, more than 75 years, hiding right there in plain sight. So, say hello to nanotyrannus lensis, the dwarf tyrant. This was not a T-Rex in training. Nope. This was a completely different species, a leaner, faster, and way more agile predator that actually hunted alongside the mighty T-Rex, going after different prey. And here's the crazy part. This wasn't some brand new discovery pulled out of thin air. The very first skull that someone suggested was nanotyrannus was found way, way back in 1946. Now, with all this new evidence, other famous fossils, like the one they call Jane, have been confidently reclassified. This elusive predator finally has its identity confirmed. Okay, so you might be thinking, why does getting one fossil right matter so much? Well, because the ripple effects here are absolutely massive. This changes our entire picture of what the world looked like in the dinosaurs' final days.
The lead scientist, Dr. Lindsay Zano, put it perfectly. She said, this doesn't just settle a debate, it flips decades of T-Rex research right on its head. This isn't just adding a new name to the list of dinosaurs, it's forcing us to rethink the most famous dinosaur of all time.
So let's break down the fallout. First, all that research on how T-Rex grew up that used nanotyrannus fossils, yeah, that's got to be redone. Second, it means the ecosystem back then was way more diverse and competitive than we ever thought, with multiple big predators running around. And third, while T-Rex was still the king, no doubt, it didn't rule alone. It had a speedy, nimble competitor to worry about. Now, to be fair, the case isn't totally slammed shut. You know, in good science, there's always debate. Some experts are still a bit cautious, and they raise a good point. If these smaller fossils aren't young T-Rexes, then where are all the actual juvenile T-Rex fossils? It's a really good question that keeps this whole thing exciting.
And that just leaves us with this incredible thought, right? If a whole different species like nanotyrannus could be mistaken for the kid version of its famous cousin for so long, what other dinosaurs have we gotten wrong? What other incredible secrets are just sitting in museum drawers waiting for a second look? It seems the story of life on Earth still has a lot of plot twists left for us to find.